Mayor Francis, hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, man. Welcome. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Welcome to Miami.
Hey, love it here. This is my third time.
Pretty special weather, huh?
I mean, coming from where I came from in England, yeah, I mean, it was freezing.
I was there recently and it was brutal.
Well, Scotland, you said you were in Scotland.
Yeah,
That's
it was a little higher, yeah.
Yeah, well,
A
listen,
little more north.
this is overdue.
Yes, it is.
You've done your practice run with the number 2 Bitcoin show, Mr. Pompliano. It's like good to get you on the top show.
Well, at least he's in Miami, so I gotta give him some love.
Yeah,
He's my guy.
He's a good guy, and we're going to see him this week, aren't we?
Awesome.
So, listen, loads to talk to you about.
Yes, there is.
Loads to talk to you about. We are a Bitcoin-only show.
Amen.
So when you talk about crypto, we're going to pull weird faces at you.
It's okay. I'll try not to talk about crypto then.
And also...
There's a lot to talk about with Bitcoin, so there's really no need to.
And football. You've got our guy, David Beckham, here.
Isn't that great?
Is he your buddy?
He is a buddy. He's a great guy, a super humble guy, and just a really decent guy. He's actually really fought hard to keep his team in Miami. Mm-hmm. And they started their practice facility in Fort Lauderdale, and now we're in hopefully the final stages of doing a deal with them in Miami. So it's going to be really cool.
We want to get him on the show.
You should.
He's a hero of mine.
He's a hero of mine too. He's a hero of a lot of people.
Who's your? Do you have a Premier League team?
His team was Manchester, so
yeah.
I kind of I do follow Manchester, and I did follow England, and sort of the World Cup as well, partly when he was cheering for them and stuff. So it was a lot of fun.
Well, Danny's a man. He's from Manchester.
He was telling me before the show.
Yeah.
Good stuff, brother.
I'm a Liverpool fan.
He was telling me one of the MLS guys at Inter Miami was a Manchester player before.
Yep.
Yeah, the one that you interviewed, I think.
Kieran Gibbs. No, he was Arsenal.
Oh, he was Arsenal.
Yeah, he was
My
Arsenal.
bad.
Yeah. And I've just bought a football team.
Nice. Which one?
Bedford FC.
Bedford. Nice.
Tiny shitty team.
Is that the one that's in the in the show?
It will be, man. Wait and see. Honestly, it's going to be the Bitcoin team.
I love it.
So I've got a feeling I'm sat here talking to a future president.
It's interesting. So few people have hit me so directly with it like that.
Yep.
But I will say this, and I have said this, I think the country is ready for a new generation, mm-hmm. A. B, I think that person is going to be someone that's conversant with Bitcoin and understands Bitcoin and understands the power of Bitcoin. So whether it's me or someone else, I think it's going to have to be someone that fits that criteria. Listen, I'm January 3rd going to be the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So I'm going to be president of all the mayors in the country. Mm-hmm. And 85% of the population of America is in cities in this country, 91% of the GDP. So understanding how our cities work and function and getting them to work in a way that's conducive to productivity, to the future, is something that could lead to other opportunities in the future. So we'll see.
Yeah. I'm going to be pretty direct because
I mean, that's your reputation. I wouldn't expect anything less.
So out of interest with that, if you did just one day, supposedly, you thought, maybe I'll become president, I'll have a go. Is there a certain number of steps you go? Do you have to go work in Congress? Do you have to go and be a senator first, or can you just go straight for it? So
that's interesting. I think the conventional wisdom, if you will, if you look back at history, usually presidents come from a couple of different places. One is their governors or their senators, by and large. That doesn't necessarily mean that anyone who runs for president has to fall into one of those categories. You had Pete Buttigieg, famously, who was the mayor of South Bend at the time, did very, very well. He's now Secretary of Transportation. So I think Mayor Buttigieg and some other mayors have run. A lot of mayors have run in the past. No one's really sort of broken that mayoral ceiling, if you will, to run for president as mayor, not that I'm aware of. But I think we live in such a different world, such a disruptive world. And I think with social media, with 24-hour news cable, where you're constantly, mayors have gotten a bigger platform, a national platform, with podcasts like this that are being viewed by millions and millions of people. And I think Bitcoin, and generally speaking, is held by a lot more people than what people think. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that has been very, very evident to me in my tweets and in my social media, is that there's this runway, right? There's this, this, I call it a portal of positivity, where, there's millions and millions of people in this country that are very, very conversant in Bitcoin And I think that's something that America's starting to discover. It's kind of like a silent majority.
Well, it's a very American idea, Bitcoin.
It is.
Very American idea.
It is a very American idea, and it's this country and the world has sort of gotten away from some of the ideas that made it successful. And what's interesting about Bitcoin is several things. Obviously, one, the fact that it was anonymously created. I think that's sort of unusual, right? That no one said, "Hey, this is my creation. I want to take sort of author's responsibility." There's probably a lot of good reasons why the person did that, or the group of people did that. I think the second thing is it is creating a solution where human beings have failed, right? And I think that for me is an exciting and interesting reality, right? Which is that there are things in this society that can be disrupted radically by people who have redesigned the process, right, and sort of thought through the process in advance, which is what computer programming is, right? Like we're going to set a set of protocols. They've made it transparent and open sourced so that people can see it, people can play with it, people can improve it if necessary, which is why I think Bitcoin has not succumbed to sort of the Napster or the MySpace, you know what I mean, in terms of being like sort of first of its kind, but then other things come and supplant it, right? The fact that it's open source and that there's a vast community of people that are able to reprogram it if necessary, or adjust it or make adjustments if necessary, which really hasn't happened all that much, but it's there. And I think that allows for flexibility, improvement, variability. But the fact that a community of people have said, hey, we see this broken system, right? The fiat system, it's broken. And it's broken because fundamentally human beings manipulate the system, right? I mean, they either governments overspend or central banks try to manipulate the ebbs and flows of the economy, and that concept has taken hold. So what's interesting is I see a bit of a generational divide. I don't know if you see it.
I definitely see it.
In terms of like my dad, who came to this country, he's an immigrant, came to this country at 12. Really smart guy, a brilliant guy, I would say, a genius probably. Written 8 books, summa cum laude, mechanical engineering, 2 graduate degrees from Harvard. He is 72 years old.
A mayor himself?
He was a mayor. He was a mayor from 85 to 93. He has started to understand it, but he had to really like wrestle with it. I mean, it wasn't intuitive. If you think about someone who was born in 1949, which he was, you're going from the gold standard, right, to a central based currency where, it's backed by the quote unquote full faith and credit of the government, right, of the United States in this case, in the case of the dollar. And then you're going to this other thing that in his mind, right, is very abstract, right? Like, and you often hear from critics, like, where's the value? What is the value, right? Like, what's the fundamental?
What is it backed by?
What is it backed by? And people don't realize it's backed by the most important thing. It's backed by the confidence of the people who use it, right? And the fundamental value is indisputable, right? You have perfect liquidity, right? You can get in and out of the position at any time. And, you can't argue that it's anything less than what it is, right? Which in this particular case, in the marketplace, and I don't know what today's value is. I haven't looked at it today, but it's 57. Okay, 57, right? So it's 57,000 times more valuable than a dollar, right? So I mean, that's the marketplace's valuation. It has valued at 57,000, percent more than a U.S. dollar, and policymakers in this country have to understand that, and I think people need to understand that the market is making decisions. And those decisions have consequences. And, there is something here that's extremely unique and it's revolutionary. And there's so many, obviously more things that we can talk about there.
Yeah, well, look, great intro, great start. Lots of places I can go with this. But I find it quite interesting that you honed in on a broken system. I think one of the things to help me would be to understand what is the role of a mayor.
Yeah.
I understand the role of a senator.
Sure.
But I don't understand the role of a mayor.
Yeah.
Where's your role and how do you work with the other components of government?
So I think my view of it is there's 2 functions for any public official, not just a mayor. I think function number 1 is and when you're a mayor, you're an executive, right? As opposed to a congressman or a senator who's a legislator. Mayors, governors, and presidents are executives. congressmen, state representatives, councilmen, they're all legislators. So I think as an executive, your number one role is to run your organization well. Like a CEO's number one role is to run their government well, or their corporation well. And so, for us, like, the fact that we have the second lowest tax rate since the 1960s, that the year before last we had the lowest homicide rate since 1954, that we have the second highest bond rating. We have the highest bond rating the city's ever had, which is the second highest bond rating that is available to cities. Those are how the city we have lowest homeless rate since 2013. We're hopefully going to eradicate homelessness in our city. Those are the things that go to how the mayor, how an executive runs their company. But I think there's a second thing that every executive needs to have, which is they need to be a leader. Mm-hmm. And leading is, not everyone does it. And there has to be a secondary component, right? Which is how are you a role model, or how are you creating a vision for what the future needs to look like? And how are you positioning this organization and the people that you represent and that you really serve to adapt themselves and be prepared for that future? And so I think one of the things that makes me somewhat unique in this country is that I feel like I'm young enough to understand these new technologies, and I'm old enough to do something about it. And so there's sort of an inflection point, right? This sort of critical juncture where it's hard. If you're a little too old, you may not completely get it. You may not totally understand. And if you're too young, you may not have the responsibility to do something about it. So it's an interesting moment. And cities, we police, the streets, we keep people safe in theory. We decide how many times to clean your garbage and pick up your garbage. When you call 911 and you're having a medical emergency, we're the ones that respond and get you to the hospital safely. It's an enormous responsibility. In the COVID world, mayors had a lot of responsibility, a ton of responsibility. So I think that's another thing that elevated mayors, for better or for worse, in the national spotlight. And I was very blessed. It was interesting. I was the second person in Dade County to get COVID, to actually test positive. I was the first elected official in the country. Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. It was, I believe, I want to say March 12th, or was it March 12th, 2020? March 12th, 2020. And right before the NBA season, I think, got canceled. And I think I did, in a few months, 300 interviews, national interviews on all three major national channels. And so I think in a weird way, the world got to know me through getting COVID.
Well, I mean, I got to know you through getting Bitcoin. We're talking about Bitcoin.
Well, we're getting there.
Yeah, I saw you on my Boy Pomps show. And okay, so when you in terms of running the city, do you also have a separate budget?
We have a budget. We have $1 billion budget. That's actually $1.2 billion. And in terms of Bitcoin, I think the Bitcoin initiatives really fall in bucket number 2, not as much in bucket number 1, although there is some bucket number 1 part of it. But the bucket number 2 part is preparing our citizens and leading into the future, right? Creating this vision. Like what should our residents expect? What does the brand of Miami mean? Right. And how does the brand of Miami, I mean, we're here with XBTO sort of in the background, obviously Gemini being a sponsor of the show, they're all friends. And, I wouldn't be friends with Tyler and Cameron if it wasn't for the fact that I became sort of the Bitcoin mayor of America, right? That I decided to take a leap of faith because I had studied the underpinnings of the technology, and I realized the transformational nature of it and the ability to really democratize investments in the world. And I went all in, and people thought I was nuts. I mean,
what was your orange pilling moment? How did it come about?
I started years ago. I was on the Florida Blockchain Foundation.
Okay.
And I was named by the CFO of Florida on the Florida Blockchain Task Force. So in terms of blockchain technologies and Bitcoin technologies, I was sort of someone who had been following it years ago. And then after I don't know if you heard of the How Can I Help tweet, December 4th of last year.
Yeah, we were talking about it earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, where Delian Asperoff from Founders Fund put out a tweet that said, hey, what if we bring Silicon Valley to Miami? And I replied very innocently, how can I help? And that tweet went completely viral.
Yep.
And I realized that there was a counter narrative in America, which is that cities in America, by and large, were pushing innovators out. They were blaming innovators for everything that went wrong. in their city, whether it was homelessness or crime or gentrification, et cetera. And I just thought that was wrong. I thought it was anti-American. And from my perspective, I want people who are innovators. I want people who are doers. I want people who are creators. And my country of origin, where my parents were born, was Cuba, which is obviously communist. And I saw very intimately the dangers of a leader in their leadership capacity saying, "Hey, I know how to fix all the problems of this community. Let me just give me all your property, give me all your your businesses, and I will distribute them equally. Don't worry about it. Everybody will be equal. Everybody will be equally happy.
But don't dissent."
Oh, don't dissent. Don't have a religion. And by the way, that equal thing, yeah, you're equal, but you're equally miserable. You're not equally happy. You're equally miserable, and that's the only equality that those governments have been able to deliver throughout the history of humanity. I call it, the biggest fraud perpetuated on humanity. The biggest atrocity, of course, was the Holocaust, but the biggest fraud perpetuated on humanity is communism. And so we're shaped by that here in Miami. And so we are entrepreneurial, we're innovative, and we saw this, had this counter, narrative opportunity. And then I just drove a bus through it. I mean, 800 tweets in the month of December. I got 27 million impressions.
Love it.
And I realized every time I talked about Bitcoin, my analytics would go off the charts. I mean, just crazy. And then I started meeting people in the community, and we started having fun with it, sort of challenging each other and doing some exciting things. And one of the things that we did was, and I think it was Pomp that put it out there.
Fuck that guy.
He said something like, I wonder what would be the first, government to put the Satoshi white paper on the website.
You did it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we
You
did
didn't
that.
get sued?
We did not get sued.
Craig Wright didn't come after you?
No. So far, so good. Please don't jinx me.
He's in court here today in Miami.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah, it's meant to be verdict day.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
So, no, so far, so good. Not looking forward to that day. But so we did that. Then I said, you know what? Let's up the ante a little bit. You know what I mean? Let's have some real fun with this, right? So we decided. I put a resolution on my commission to allow my employees to get paid in Bitcoin, to allow my residents to pay for fees and taxes in Bitcoin, and then to explore the possibility of holding Bitcoin as an asset on our balance sheet. And so I got that through my commission, which was a bit of a surprise because my commissioners, who frankly have been very good, and they have been very trusting with me. They were like, okay, you go do this, we'll sort of back you up. And most of them did. I think I was a 4-1 vote. And when I put out the video that said, hey, this is what we've done, I mean, it went bonkers, like bonkers. And it just highlighted to me that this is not just a small community of people that are loud and evangelistic. This is a very deep-rooted tens, if not hundreds of millions of people that are involved. And I've talked to a lot of the exchanges, obviously the Winklevoss twins who've become friends, Brian Armstrong who's become a friend. And they've confided in me some of the number of accounts and stuff like that. This is big stuff. And I think part of the reason why people talk about me running for president or me being president is because people like know how deep this is and how the impact of it and what it can do socially, right? For Central America, South America, Africa, which I think are the countries right now that are ripe for massive Bitcoin adoption. And I believe, and I've said this is only the second time I say this. So first time I said it was not in a forum as large as this.
Okay.
Which is, I believe that Bitcoin has the ability to peacefully eradicate communism on the planet. So,
well, I interviewed Nick Carter yesterday. I don't know if you know Nick, but he's here as well. And he wrote an article about Bitcoin called A Most Peaceful Revolution. And I think why people probably latch onto someone like yourself, we've seen so much irresponsible fiscal policy and monetary policy.
It's crazy.
Levels of, globally, the levels of debt are unsustainable.
No doubt.
And then we see politicians such as Elizabeth Warren going very anti-Bitcoin, not understanding.
Totally has it backwards.
Yeah. Hillary Clinton now opining on this, and great tweet the other day from my friend Jessica who said she can't work her emails, but she knows everything about cryptocurrency. And then we see someone like you come along and you spend the time understanding it. You spend the time embracing it. You go down the rabbit hole and you understand exactly what it is. And at this time of high inflation, very scary inflation, but it's really changing, affecting people's lives. you are part of the team that's considering this alternative.
Yep.
And I think that's why people are getting behind you, because they're bored of the old guard, 78-year-old presidents who really don't understand what's going on in the world. It's a bit why people like Bukele. I mean, a politician who couldn't be questioned, but at the same time, it's somebody who is understanding of younger people. Understanding that, because really, the old guys are retiring, right?
But the thing is about people like Elizabeth Warren and Hillary Clinton is that in the Democratic Party generally, and I don't want to make this about party because this should not be a partisan thing, right?
We agree.
To me, this is not about party. It's not about the letter next to our name. I think people obsess over that and they make it about that, and that's wrong. I just say this. Oftentimes, those people who portend to care the most about the impoverished in our community are the ones in many ways that are the most hostile to Bitcoin, which is absolutely counter. It's wrong. It's just absolutely wrong. What Bitcoin has done, or what it does, is a few things. One, and probably most importantly, is it creates a system of exchange, right, where people are not subjected to the wild inflation and wild devaluation of currencies through oftentimes corrupt actors, right? So I think that's one of the biggest things. That's why you're seeing it in Central America. That's why you're seeing it in South America and in Africa. And I think that has an incredible power to liberate people and democratize their choices. I think the second part of it is sort of this idea that people should have a right to get a return. Right, we've created a system, a financial system, where unless you're wealthy, you can't risk capital. Unless you're wealthy, you can't make money. So then we complain that there's a tremendous amount of income inequality, which of course there is, right? And so then the question is, well, how are you supposed to make money if you put your money in a bank account, you get zero interest, and oh, by the way, the money that you had today is worth 5, 10, 15, 20% less than what it was a year ago. So it is it's an impossibility that somebody is not only not going to make a return, they're actually losing money by having their money in a bank account. And so, this is simple economics. This is not like, we're not talking about derivatives. We're not talking about complicated things. So I don't know why it's hard for people to understand. It should not be partisan. It should not be about Elizabeth Warren or Hillary Clinton or anybody on the Republican side. It really should be more about understanding the fundamentals, understanding why has a computer program been so successful at substituting a human-run program? I think that's something that fundamentally we need to look at. And I'm going to tell you this now. Where human conditions are broken, computers and computer programs will fill the void. And it's going to happen in our generation looking forward, and it's going to happen in municipal governments. It's going to happen in different places. And I'm seeing that disruption as clearly as I see you right in front of me.
Well, it's backed by math and truth.
Exactly.
Which is
and it's objective.
Important. Yeah, but the partisan issue is an interesting one as a point you make, because it's definitely been picked up by politicians who seem to be more on the right. Not entirely, not exclusively. I was going to read you something my friend Parker Lewis wrote, because this is a great tweet. He put, "Liberals are going to love Bitcoin when they figure out what it can do for lower income families, but Democrats will hate it. Conservatives will love Bitcoin when they figure out what it can do for the budget deficit, but Republicans will hate it." So it seems to be a thing that, like, we understand that Bitcoin isn't a partisan issue. We understand it can benefit everybody, but it seems to hold some kind of existential threat to politicians, or they feel like it does.
Well, the problem is that everything does right now, right? Everything is we live in such a divided world, and I think that's the reason why people sort of gravitate towards me, in the sense that I was blessed to be elected in a city that is majority Democrat. I'm a Republican, so again, not to obsess over the letter, but I was elected by 85%. So I was elected by, and reelected by close to 80%. So I was elected and reelected by a vast swath of the people in my city, because I try to focus on how to better their quality of life. I try to focus on their lives and what are the things that I can do as a leader to make their lives better, as opposed to this crazy prism where everything is so divisive, so antagonistic. And there's a point that you sort of touched on that I want to go a little deeper in, because I don't think people totally understand, which is the wide adoption of Bitcoin will create fiscal discipline in governments. And
Yes.
I'm not sure people have completely understood that. But the thing is here now, because governments control their own currency, they can print money, essentially, right? And they can borrow money in whatever ways they want, and they can set interest rates. When they go to a currency that they don't control, they don't have that leisure, right? They can't just print more money. That's not in the toolbox,
Yep.
right? They can't. They actually have to balance. So we in our city, we actually balance our budget. I know it's a really crazy concept in
What?
government. I know it's crazy.
What?
No, it's crazy,
Gee.
right? This is actually even crazier.
Yeah.
We actually have a surplus.
What?
We have $160 million in the piggy bank.
That's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. So,
Did you inherit a balance book?
well, understand that I've been a councilman and mayor
Okay.
for 12 years. So actually, what I inherited when I got here in November of 2009 was a broken government. We had just had the financial meltdown, right? Market meltdown, the real estate bubble burst. And we had, for the first time ever, a 20% budget deficit. So we had what you call a do-nothing deficit. Like if you did nothing, this is what your deficit would be, of $115 million on a $600 million budget. So we had to cut 20% of our budget in 1 year. So when I see these governments say, oh, well, you can't cut, it's impossible to cut. We cut 20% in 1 year. And it was painful. It was very painful. But we had to cut, we didn't let go of one person, but we had to cut salaries dramatically. We had to cut pension benefits dramatically. We obviously would have liked to have not had to do it, but we didn't have a choice. We had to tighten our belt, and we saved the city. And then we built up its reserves over time, by making good investment decisions. And now we're in a very, very good place. We have the second highest bond rating available, but the highest bond rating the city has ever had, which is AA+.
Why do you think the federal government struggle so much then to balance the books? Is there no will?
Because they've used it as a way to manipulate. This is the reason why Bitcoin is successful. They've used it as a tool, right? They use it as a tool. They realize that you're just playing with the money supply. And so when you play with the money supply, certain things happen. And you have to understand the dollar is also and this is where the U.S. will really have to figure things out, because the dollar is an instrument of public policy throughout the world. That doesn't mean that the U.S. can't hold Bitcoin and can't use Bitcoin as an instrument of public policy, because it's resources at the end of the day. And this country has a tremendous amount of resources. And part of our ability to be influential in the world is to use those resources in an appropriate manner to make sure that we can protect our citizens and that we create prosperity across the world, in part so that people aren't, flooding us all the time. But yeah, it's going to create a lot more fiscal discipline, because governments like the United States and others are not going to just be able to print their way out of financial problems. And so, there have been talk about balanced budget amendments. I think that's something that's worth looking at very seriously in the federal level, unless there's like a war, or unless there's some emergency declaration. The federal government should be required to balance its budget, just like we're required to balance our budget, just like in your home. You can't not balance your budget.
Nope.
It doesn't work that way. Otherwise, you're going to be on the streets real soon.
Yeah, and you know what? When we have 6.2% inflation, it's not just debasing everyone in here's savings and salaries. It's debasing your budget.
No doubt. But who thinks that it's actually 6.2%?
Nobody does.
Right.
That's the lowest they can give you. We know it's probably 10, 15%.
Yeah, you don't count real estate inflation. There's a lot of things that aren't counted. And so, nobody really believes it's 6%, but it's shocking. That's a shockingly high number, even in terms of the CPI. Right, so it's really sad in a way, but in another way, it's a huge opportunity. And I think we're in a critical moment. China has given us a huge favor, by banning mining and banning Bitcoin.
What a mistake that will turn out to be.
Well, it's understandable, because they're a communist, central controlled, government. And so what's interesting about the U.S. is we struggle with something like a virus, because we're a democracy. Everybody has an opinion. Right? Like China's an autocracy, right? They just tell you got to stay home, you got to do this. There's no debating about any of these things. But
New York might disagree with you.
Yeah, well, that's true. Well, that's why they're all here. They're coming here.
They have all come here.
It's amazing. But we've definitely benefited from this moment. But I think, here in this country, we have an enormous opportunity to to get a larger market share of the Bitcoin mining, which I'm a huge proponent of. I think what people don't understand, they've made a big issue of the ESG, which is a totally bogus issue. But I will say this: American mining companies, almost, I don't think I've ever met one that's not completely carbon neutral. They're very ESG conscious. And even the biggest ones that I've been to. But the other thing that's really interesting is, I don't know if you've ever seen or been to a place called Marble, North Carolina.
No, I haven't.
I don't expect you to be.
I've been to Raleigh. Is that South Carolina?
It is. I think Raleigh is North Carolina. North Carolina as well.
I've been to Raleigh,
but Raleigh's a bigger city.
Okay.
So the reason why I say Marble, I'm not going to say what I know they're going to hear this and they're going to call me, well, you should have said her name. One of the biggest mining companies, not the biggest mining company in the country, has a facility in Marble, North Carolina. And the reason why I say that is because it used to be a Levi's manufacturing facility.
Okay.
So follow me. So those jobs that were in that facility left overseas, right, to China, that could do it cheaper, right? And what happened? That city went from a population of thousands to a population of 400, right? It was decimated by the loss of manufacturing jobs. What's happening now? Now they have a, multi-megawatt of mining facility there, which is incredible when I've seen it in person. And they're bringing those jobs back to rural America. So, there's this thought that Bitcoin is something that will just help, sort of the elite or people in the urban areas. And this is delivering jobs, what I call a technological industrial revolution in the United States, which can create a lot of prosperity, not just in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas. And people don't know that because Bitcoin mining is so mysterious. It's like Bitcoin mining and it's so bad and this, that, and the other. And it's actually not bad. It doesn't consume as much electricity as people like it to make it seem like. And in the US in particular, because remember, before China banned mining, 60 or 70% of the market share, it was in Russia and China, right? So they're coal-producing, coal-burning countries. So obviously, that's where the ESG issues came from. You have countries that are using dirty energy that are mining by and large, but that's changing almost overnight thanks to China's actions.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit more than that. I was in Texas recently with Governor Abbott and talking to him about, he's like yourself. He understands Bitcoin to an extent. He wants to support the Bitcoin industry, but he wants to bring miners into Texas, into Austin, not only because it brings jobs, but actually also it has this kind of like new magical property of helping stabilize the grid, which is this whole new weird thing about Bitcoin, which people are trying to get their head around.
Well, they don't understand that what the miners do oftentimes is they'll go to power companies and they'll look at what is their excess. Believe it or not, there's a lot of things about power people don't know. First of all, there's a lot of wasted power, a ton of wasted power. In fact, I would say 30 or 40% of generated power is wasted. So that's one factor. And then so they'll go there and they'll say, hey, look, why are you wasting this? Let us sort of harness this, let us use it. And then, they do it in with a thought process of either being completely clean in terms of how they're getting it, or offsetting, whatever is not particularly clean that they're getting.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about energy and the energy mix. It's something that's discussed quite a bit. And I also want to talk a little bit about climate change issues, because I know it affects Miami. We'll come to that secondly.
Sure.
But what's the energy mix like here in Miami? Where do you draw your energy from?
So it's predominantly nuclear.
Okay.
And then our energy company, which is Florida Power and Light, they're very innovative. And, a few years ago, to their credit, they sort of got into it with the solar industry or the solar companies or people who wanted a rooftop solar. And so rather than, they fought it a little bit, right? Which is understandable. But then what they did was interesting. They pivoted. We live in a disruptive world. And so you have two choices. You can pivot, and sort of try to get, beyond the disruption and get ahead of the disruption, or you can wither away and die, basically. Right. And so what they did was they pivoted and they became the largest purveyor of solar in the country. And so we have solar power and we have nuclear power. Both are relative, nuclear is clean, which obviously you have to do something with the nuclear waste, but it's clean generation. It doesn't have any carbon emission, which is what creates, obviously, the, climatic issues. And so, we have the possibility of being a Bitcoin mining hub as well. And that's something that I've been focused a lot on, trying to create those connections. We had our first big breakthrough with the city of Homestead, which is a city close to Miami, in the county that we reside in, which has done a partnership with a local entrepreneur who is taking their excess energy as well, and is doing a Bitcoin mining facility, a 10 megawatt facility. So I mean, there's the sky's the limit. You can go around the state and look at those kinds of opportunities and create public-private partnerships to take excess power and put it to good use.
Why do you think there's been this kind of, I don't know how to put it, this kind of reversal against nuclear in some places? I know across parts of Europe they've been decommissioning nuclear facilities and not replacing them. And we know in certain places where they're decommissioning them, they're having issues with blackouts. Why do you think that issue exists?
I think nuclear, it's had its moments, certainly when the technology was new, was probably the height of it. Then it went through some time with some of the incidents like Chernobyl and others where
Fukushima.
people were afraid of what could happen. Obviously, they become targets, or potential targets. But I think it's seeing a renaissance, in my opinion. I actually see it sort of a little bit the opposite. I think they're seeing a renaissance in nuclear. I think people understand that it's extremely clean, and certainly by comparison to coal, it's almost unlimited. And of course, you have to do something with the nuclear material, with the waste. But if the plants are, if you actually invest, which is sort of the opposite, if you actually invest and you allow the nuclear power companies to stay state of the art, it can be done extremely safely. What's interesting about Miami, to your point, sort of the point number 2 about climate change here.
Let's talk about that.
Is, we have essentially 3 climatic phenomena that we deal with. One of them is obviously hurricanes, which come seasonally from August to, I think, October, more or less. Then you have what we call dry day flooding, believe it or not, which is we have a porous subsoil, which is limestone. So the water actually pools up based on the tides and based on the moon, basically. And they call it a king tide. And so the water actually comes up from underneath and pools in certain areas of the city. And then you have rain bombs, right? Like what they call them rain bombs because they're more intense and in terms of duration and amount of water than usual, right? And that's one of the ones that really creates flooding around the city. But we have not buried our head in the sand and said like, hey, these things don't exist, or we're going to deny that this is happening or whatever. Like we've actually done something very unusual. We have actually our residents voted to tax ourselves, which is not something that we like to do, right? To the tune of $400 million, $200 million for climatic resiliency projects to adapt to these kinds of climatic events. What people don't realize about Miami, and this is probably going to shock you, is that Miami has actually suffered less hurricane damage in the last 10 years than New York City.
I would not have guessed that at all. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, because of Sandy. So we're just much more resilient. Like we can experience more storms and not have as much damage because we're more prepared, I guess is a better way of saying it.
But was it just that Sandy was one freak event for New York?
Sandy was a big event, right? And so New York certainly wasn't prepared for it. But I mean, if you just take that snapshot and you say to yourself, let's say it's a Jeopardy question, right? Would you get the right answer, right? Most people wouldn't, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So there are a lot of people, and it definitely exists within the Bitcoin community, of people who are not just skeptical of policy with regards to dealing with climate change, but actually reject the idea that there is human-caused climate change, especially within my community. Sure. I'm not one of those.
Yeah.
I've been yelled at for being somebody who said there is climate change. Like, what kind of message would you give to people like that?
I think the message is twofold. Threefold. One is, look, let's first deal with what we're seeing. And we're definitely seeing things. I mean, they're tangible. This is not speculation. I mean, I just gave you 3 events that we see on a regular basis. So let's deal with that. So from an adaptation perspective, let's deal with that. From a mitigation perspective, which is essentially implementing policies that reduce carbon emission, to me, we have a motto here in Miami where we say the environment is the economy, right? There's this notion that you have to pick one or the other. It's either do something that's good for the environment, but is shitty for the economy, or do something that's good for the economy, but shitty for the environment. And I think we try to marry the two things, and you're starting to see it anyways with electric vehicles and, rooftop solar and all the different technologies that are becoming ubiquitous. So it's kind of already happening in our generation. And then I think the third thing is, look, we as human beings, we have an obligation, I think a common obligation, right? And I have two kids. I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I want to make sure that my kids get to experience the world that I got to experience, right? I don't want them to there to be animals that are extinct that I got to see that they didn't get to see, fish, et cetera. And so I think we all have a common obligation to do what we can, right? Within our power, individual power, to basically be good stewards of the earth. I mean, it's that simple. And I don't think that there's a sort of an economic problem with that. I think it's on the contrary. I actually think that, look, in life, sometimes it's actually good to sacrifice a little bit, not get everything that you want all the time, and do things that are healthy for the greater good versus you individually.
Yeah. I got to ask you about MiamiCoin.
Go for it.
Tell me about it. Tell me,
Sure.
What's the deal with it?
Sure. So the deal is this. The deal is it's a Bitcoin-backed coin, right? So as you know about Bitcoin, it's the most decentralized, most stable, most unhackable system. But it is a blockchain that was built exclusively for Bitcoin transactions, essentially exclusively for Bitcoin transactions. So what MiamiCoin is a derivative of that chain. So a variety of developers, Princeton grads, created a blockchain called Stacks. And Stacks hashes...
Munib.
Yeah, Munib and others. And it basically hashes onto the Bitcoin blockchain. And so what they basically said, and their thesis was, look, let's create a coin on Stacks, which hashes onto the Bitcoin blockchain, and that the mining revenue of that coin, a portion of it, right, in this case, 30% of the benefit, if you will, gets put in a digital wallet for the cities. So it's a little bit different than Bitcoin in the sense that Bitcoin, the entire economic incentive is for the miner, right? The miner who mines it gets 100% of the mining revenue, and that's great. In the case of MiamiCoin, the miners get 70% of the revenue. The city gets 30% of the revenue in a digital wallet. So, we thought at the beginning of this, we're like, maybe this thing will do $3 million in a year. Maybe it'll do $5 million in a year. Who knows, right? We're, I think, 3 months in and it's raised $30 million.
Wow.
$30 million. So what we're going to do with it is we're going to do two things, which I think is super fascinating. And I'd love to hear your perspective on this. One is we're going to take a piece of it in fiat, and I'll tell you why. We're going to take about $5 million in fiat. And the only reason why we're going to do that is because we want to prove to our residents that it actually exists, right?
Yeah.
This is not like some fucking...
Here's some real money.
Yeah, it's not like a virtual thing that is like in somebody's imagination or on some like Twitter account, and it's not real. So we're going to do that just as a viability threshold. The remaining $25 million, we're going to stake it. And the staking yield is going to be Bitcoin.
Okay.
Which, of course, is, as we know, the most reliable, the most dependable of all the cryptocurrencies. So what we're doing is we're going to, I think what we're going to finally end up doing is we're going to say to all registered voters in Miami, and this is an incentive for people to register to vote in Miami, so pay attention, guys.
Yeah.
We're going to give them a Bitcoin wallet. We're going to give them a digital wallet. And we're going to give them a quarterly Bitcoin dividend. Okay, so every single Miamian is going to get Bitcoin in their digital wallet on a quarterly basis. So think about a city in America, or think about a city anywhere really in the country, where you're a resident, your government has innovated, and the byproduct of that innovation is Bitcoin for you. I think it's fascinating. I don't think it's happened anywhere in the world. Maybe in some like oil producing countries, stuff like that, where they would give like an oil dividend. But it's a fascinating concept, and it's going to empower people. It's going to educate people. And we're getting some very, very big exchanges that are excited about this project in creating the digital wallets, obviously in part for their own self-interest. And by the way, Tyler and Cameron, we can talk too.
Yeah. What's the population here of Miami?
So our population is about, depending on the census, if you believe the census, it's somewhere in the 600,000 range.
Okay.
We have 200,000 registered voters. The reason why it's important to do this as registered voters is because you need to verify. Like anybody could say, I'm a Miami resident. People think Miami is a place that punches above its weight. So, people who live in other unincorporated areas of the county think they live in Miami, but they really live in Kendall, or they live in, North Dade or whatever. So, there has to be an authentication method for the people who are receiving it.
Yeah.
And a place that we can verify.
So as you know, like the Bitcoin community can be quite savage.
Yeah, it's okay.
They can be quite savage. And I'm not going to debate the technicals behind Stacks and MiamiCoin.
Sure.
Because we don't need to do that today.
Yeah.
But the idea that Bitcoin gets into the wallets of everyone in the city, for a city that is pro-Bitcoin, with a mayor that is pro-Bitcoin, That is cool.
It's amazing.
We've seen it out in El Salvador where President Bukele is trying to get Bitcoin in people's hands so they understand. And look, some will get rid of it straight away. Some will hold on to it. What's the response been from your constituents, the people who aren't Bitcoiners? Like, are they saying, "What are you doing?
No,
this is amazing"?
It's the opposite. First of all, here's the thing, and this is the biggest surprise. I'll go to restaurants. I literally was at a restaurant for lunch before we met, and the waitress at the restaurant is she's an investor, right? And she knows about Bitcoin, holds Bitcoin, et cetera. I've had people that are servers, hostesses, janitors that have thanked me for what I'm doing in the crypto space. So that's why I keep telling you that, all my experiences, whether they be on Twitter or whether they be in real life, lead me to believe that the number of people that know about Bitcoin, have invested in Bitcoin, or are thinking about investing in Bitcoin, or are influenced by Bitcoin is massive. I'm talking about massive, like way, 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 way bigger than what most people think, like way bigger. Like I'm talking about, orders of magnitude bigger. And so they're just thrilled because what they see is not just, listen, they don't just see that one initiative, right? What they see is XBTO, right? Naming the team Inter Miami. They see, FTX spending $200 million on the arena. They see, exchanges like eToro and blockchain.com moving and creating jobs in the city. So they see this ecosystem growing. And they realize that it's not only going to benefit them as individuals, but it's going to benefit their kids, and it's going to benefit their unborn grandkids. So there's a tri-generational, in my estimation, there's a tri-generational impact on these technologies, and people are excited. Look, there's this notion that in politics you just have to spew hate and negativity to get ahead, and I totally do not subscribe to that. I think vision, positivity always wins. The problem is there's usually an absence of that.
Well, listen, when you get to those presidential debates, I'm going to be watching you closely.
No problem.
Like, is he criticizing them? Is he talking policy?
I'm going to be focusing on the positive stuff, trust me.
So is that a admission you're going for it then?
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, I think so. Listen.
Is that a Freudian slip there?
Is that we're not going to cut that, Danny. So we're nearly done. In terms of the population, have you seen a massive increase in people coming in here? Like you say, there's like 600,000 people. Was it like 500,000 a year ago? Or?
So the only statistic that I've seen that has any sort of meaning is the number of people coming to Florida. It's like 1,500 a day.
Wow.
A day.
A day.
So I think a significant amount of those people are coming to Miami. It's hard to tell. For whatever reason, we always in my opinion, always undercount in our censuses. I think we're just doing too much fun stuff, and we don't have time to fill out the form. So I think that's what ends up happening. We try our best to get it up there, but we're always laggers in terms of what our response rate is versus what dwelling units and the number of people that we have. So I often think we're underreported by 20, maybe 25%.
Okay, so in terms of this massive increase in people,
yep.
Is that put a strain on the infrastructure? Is that where your budgets now have to go? Are they things you have to think about now?
No, it's actually the opposite. And I'll tell you, so this is where sort of my national platform comes in with this agenda for America, which is, what we've done is we've created the conditions for prosperity. So we've actually reduced taxes, our tax rate. We don't have a state income tax. So if you're in New York, if you're in California, you're already paying an extra 14% in an area that's probably 2x more expensive. So your cost of differential, cost of living differential is 2x, and your income taxes is 14% or whatever. So that's a huge advantage for Miami.
But where are they blowing the money then? Because you could argue in places like, especially if you look up to San Francisco, which I know there has been a leak of people down to here.
Oh, massive.
They have massive crime issues, massive homeless issues, and they're taxing a wealthy population.
100%.
Higher than anywhere else in the country.
And people are furious because the way they look at it is, look, I'll pay the taxes, but give me a return on investment. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so they don't feel like they're getting that. And it's worse than that, because then what the government's doing is they're turning around and they're saying, you, Elon Musk, F you.
I know. How bad was that? What
crazy.
A goal.
I mean, it's insane. And so, had we been in this Miami moment a little earlier, I'm convinced that Elon would have been a Miami resident, but holding out hope.
Damn, well, you can get more of the Bitcoin companies down here.
We will.
It's essentially you, Texas, and Wyoming competing, but
That's
really
right.
it's you and You in Texas?
Well, I love Wyoming, in terms of their laws, but and listen, Senator Loomis is great, and they have some amazing people there, and they get it, right?
They have good steak.
Yeah, and they do. And by the way, a lot of people are moving to that state, believe it or not. But I always say, in terms of competition, because there is some friendly competition here. I always say, if we're even, we're leaving. So, my goal is to always be, from a regulatory perspective, no worse than any other state and potentially better, right? In terms of regulation. If we do that, I don't think there's anybody that's going to pick any place versus Miami. I mean, there's nobody right now in Abu Dhabi thinking, man, I can't wait to go to Austin. You know what I mean? There's nobody in, Colombia saying that. And again, it's nothing against Austin. I respect the people of Austin, and I've been there multiple times, but
they want to come here.
They want to come here.
Yeah.
They want to come here.
Well, it's a beautiful city.
It's incredible now. Our Basel, this may be the largest sale of NFTs that we've had in the history of NFTs, in the history of the world, right here in Miami this week. And so it's really a fascinating time to be in Miami, and it's a fascinating time to be an American if we get things right going forward.
Okay, my last thing I want to finish on with you is it can be difficult with politicians sometimes because, not you, but
Got it.
especially in the UK, we often feel lied to or
Understood.
don't trust them, feel let down. I mean, I'm completely disengaged in UK politics now. There's no one for me to vote for. But occasionally I've met somebody, I'm like, I could vote for that type of person yourself.
Right.
You talk a good game, you're a Bitcoiner, you like football,
Yeah.
you speak Spanish, you're
Por supuesto.
you're somebody like, I think I could vote for that guy. But as you climb that political ladder, how do you maintain that? How do you not become part of that old elite? I mean, is it something you think about?
Of course. And I think I'm lucky in a sense because I'm a bit of an anomaly and a bit of a unicorn in the sense that, first of all, I've been around politics my whole life. My dad first ran for office when I was 2 years old. I did my first political commercial when I was 2 years old. Nice. I looked into a camera in perfect Spanish. I said, "Vota por papi, por favor," which means vote for my dad, please.
Nice.
And I've been, my entire career in politics has been in a nonpartisan position. And as I talked to you about some of the successes that I've had being a uniter in a city that, is majority a different party than I'm from. So I think that helps. I think the generational inflection point helps. And I think, look, at the end of the day, like to your point, there are going to be moments, I'm sure, in the debate stage, if I ever get there or anything like that, where I see I almost blew it a second time.
You're going to get it. Everybody knows it. Come on.
Where there are going to be moments where I'm sure, people they're going to test you, and they're going to test who you're about and what you're about. And maybe somebody will try to push you into the negative or something like that. And how do you manage that? And I think you have to be willing to lose, right? You have to be willing to accept the possibility of losing. And actually, I would recommend a book if you haven't read it. It's called Breathe by Hickson Gracie. I don't know if you know Hickson Gracie, super, super prominent jiu-jitsu family, the Gracie family.
Yeah, I think I've heard Rogan talk about this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, actually, he was on Rogan's show.
Yeah.
He was on Rogan's show, and he's amazing. And he talks about visualizing every possible scenario, every possible outcome, including death. Like when he would fight, right? He would even visualize the possibility of dying, and accept it. He would accept, look, I'm taking a risk, because they would do what's called vale tutte, which is basically fight to the death, essentially. And so the idea was accept every outcome, humiliation, death, anything that can go wrong. And once you've accepted that, you're ready, right? And so I think there's a little bit of psychology and visualization that goes into anything that's massive in terms of pressure. And you accept the consequences and see what happens.
Well, listen, at a time of weak leadership, I think people need somebody to come forward who's a bit different, a bit more interesting.
No doubt.
And like you say, younger. I mean, how old are you?
I'm 44.
Oh, well, I'm 43.
There you go. No wonder why we get along.
Yeah. Well, listen, look, I wish you the best.
Thanks.
Ditto. If you run, I wish you the success.
Finger commas.
Let me ask you one thing. If you do it, and if you get it, can I come to the White House?
Amen. What kind of color M&Ms do you want?
I think I want the red ones.
There you go.
On my team, but no, I'll come there. I want my, Portnoy got to interview Trump. Portnoy got to interview Trump. I want to interview President Suarez.
All right,
man. Appreciate you. Anything you ever need from me, use reach out.
Thanks, brother.
All right, man.
Thanks.